All right. Welcome, everyone, to the final episode of Accessibility August here on Dev Roulette Live. Thank you to everyone who has been joining us throughout the month. That has been awesome. We've had a lot of really amazing speakers. And as you can see, the final speakers for today are Ashlee Boyer and Crystal Preston-Watson. And once again, I have just super admired all of their work and advocacy from my main way to interact with them is through Twitter, and it's been great. Let's go with Crystal to kick us off with a little more about yourself.
So good morning, everyone. It's morning for me, but I am Crystal. I'm an accessibility engineer at Salesforce.org, and I handle I'm accessibility lead for all the three different or clouds products, nonprofit education, and also philanthropy cloud. And I am very online on Twitter a lot, and yeah, that is me.
Awesome. And how about for yourself, Ashlee?
Um, I am Ashlee Boyer. I am from Indianapolis, Indiana. And that's where I live now. And there's not a lot of people here. So I am also very online because there's not the most people that I talk to are like on the coasts. We do have communities here, so I am glad about that. And I do know quite a few people from there. So I'm a front end web developer and I work with React the most. Um, Hopefully you can't hear my dog growling. I don't know what she's so upset about. So I have two dogs, the one that just made some weird noises. And I work on accessibility the most outside of work because I'm just front end and we don't have accessibility positions at my job. Um, so that is where I get to practice the most outside of work.
Yeah, love it. And I've enjoyed that we've had a mix of skills or credentials or whatever you want to call it throughout the show. And I love that it emphasizes for everyone that anybody can be an advocate, if nothing else. And there's ways to incorporate these learnings into your job, even when you're not an accessibility professional. So super love having both of you here. All right, so for those who are new to the show, I've been calling it Dev Roulette, and the reason for that is that when my awesome guests sign up, they're not sure who they're going to be paired up with until a few days before we go on stream. And also, the next part of this is that we have a wheel of topics. So there's still a bit of luck of the draw, if you will, for what we're actually going to talk about today and in what order. But the main point of the show is to get into this wheel of topics. So I have been, our Zoom order switched again. I'll fix your labels in just a moment. The video bubbles keep switching this time. But in the actual order, we have Ashlee first. So Ashlee, I'm going to go ahead and have you start the wheel whenever you're ready. A motion warning for everyone watching that this wheel will spin. So whenever you're ready, Ashlee, you can say start. And then after a little bit of time, say stop, and we'll see what we land on for our first topic.
Okay, I'm ready. Start.
All right, it's going to spin.
All right, stop.
All right, and this is one from you, Ashlee. The topic is user preferences. So whatever
yes.
angle you want to kick that off for us, go ahead.
Yes. I'm so excited. And this is like my hyper focus right now, I guess you can call it that, in accessibility. Because it's actually part of I'm not trying to do self promo here, but I'm working on a course. And it was one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and how preferences, like the language around that isn't always really strong enough to convey that, accessibility accommodations aren't preferences and they aren't optional, they are actual needs. So I've been thinking a lot about the words around that, like user settings or customizations or things like that. So if anyone has any language suggestions on that, I would love to hear it. So this can come down to things like reducing motion and a lot of the typical things that you think about or have to do that are OS level. So reduce motion is one of those things that you can set in your accessibility settings. on your device. And I do it all the time when I'm trying to test reduce motion stuff. This can come down to font settings, which is something that I really think Twitter should do, considering they just changed the font. And some people it's less accessible for them, and other people it's more accessible for them. And the reason that you need things like user settings, customizations, preferences, is because accessibility accommodations, they can often clash with each other. So me being deaf, I need closed captions. And I would love to be able to, well, not right now because there's a pandemic, but I would love to be able to go to movie theaters and have captions on screen. But I can also acknowledge that some people, that would be very distracting for them. And so there are devices that they don't really empower people because they're not that usable at all. So you have the battery powered caption things that you put in the cup holder, and it's not that useful. And then they also have glasses that you can wear that show captions, but if you already wear glasses, they don't really fit over, so it doesn't really work. So there aren't a ton of super great options at movie theaters, but with something like Zoom, like what we're chatting through right now, I have captions turned on and I need them, but they're not showing for everyone absolutely. So I have the opportunity, I'm empowered to have that turned on for myself. And that's what user settings and customizations, that's what it's all about, is empowering people to do what they need to do. And I think a gap there that definitely also needs to be addressed is with Zoom, for the longest time, you had to somehow request captions. You still have to request captions, but they did make it nicer very recently. So putting that burden on people to ask for these things is tricky, and you don't want to do that. So, I think Zoom did it. I think they have a lot more work to do. But the thing that they did recently is that the caption option is showing. And so you click it and you say request captions, and you can also request anonymously, which is really nice. I was not expecting that. So this stuff is all about empowering people to get what they need and taking down barriers and giving them options. And the options also address conflicting access needs that different disabled people have, because we're all different.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a super amazing intro to the idea of user preferences, and so
Thanks.
thank you so much. And I love the key phrase that you were hitting on of it's about empowerment. I love that so much. I love that framing, and I'm gonna just say that I don't see that phrasing used very much when we talk about it. So I love that. We should all use that more. But anyway, we'll switch to Crystal and your additional thoughts on user preferences and accessibility.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley said a lot of the stuff, things that I think. I think one thing I've been thinking about recently with user preferences is it seems that, and the Twitter that what happened, Twitter recent, kind of highlighted it, but not really understanding that people have, you know, multiple disabilities, and that there's okay, this is this setting is going to be for people who have visual impairments, or and this and not really understanding that many people they just don't have, they're not they don't have a disability in just one thing. I have visual impairment, but I also have social anxiety, and that there's a lot of intersection in disability, and really needing to understand that. And that's the reason why when it comes to user settings, it is something that it really needs to be mindful from the very beginning, and not kind of oh, now we need to worry about empowering our users to be able to change settings for their needs. But if you're doing that way after the fact, you're trying to do this at the your third iteration or your third MVP, you're really you're going to play a game that you'll never catch up on. And that's something that is, I just see it just really, I'm getting a little bit off of user preferences, but it just really highlights that for something like that, you really need to understand that, with the intersection of disabilities, that is something that has to be thought about when you're designing and building products from the very beginning, because you need to think about, well, okay, well, if someone has this disability and this impairment, how would these features work with each other? Because there can be, settings and things that can clash, as we saw, where I was, the change with Twitter, and I don't mean to harp on that, actually helped me a lot. Where when it happened, everyone was like very angry, and I was like, oh man, I can actually. I was like, this is awesome. It's like I still need a screen reader when I don't have, my, for my visual impairment, I have like a hard contact. I still need a screen reader if I don't have that in. But I was like, it's much brighter. So if I didn't want to use my screen reader, I could put my phone really close to my face. But where it helped me, it caused a lot of issues for other people with headaches and eye strain and things like that. So really, it's like it's great to really give people user settings, but you really have to be mindful and thoughtful and strategic in how you're implementing.
Yeah, awesome supplemental points there. A classic example I think of as a front end developer is light and dark mode. And for myself, I did a light theme for forever. Um, and I was actually pretty confused about folks that preferred a darker theme because I didn't realize I had an astigmatism. And so I would have halos. And so I finally got that corrected. But I didn't even know that that was what my, base problem was. And I'm sure a lot of folks experience similar things where you're like, why does everybody like it this way? And I don't. And if you're not, as you were saying, empowered to, make an adjustment there, which of course we can for a code theme, right? But even when we talk about it for website switches, a lot of folks have that follow user preferences and call it a day. Well, similarly, I personally still prefer to read over a light background most of the time, which I will admit that my main site is a dark theme, and that's on my backlog that I really need to get to allow folks to switch it to a lighter theme. I don't even have it auto switching or anything, but and so just not even thinking that it's not about, even if you make a preference choice for that dark or light theme for your system, that doesn't necessarily mean you want it, site-wide, system-wide. I know Twitter also, I noticed, forces you into dark mode on somebody else's site, even if they don't have it actually built in when you visit in their in-app browser, which is interesting. So all these little choices that when you're not thinking about the broader spectrum of who's visiting your site, it's very easy to pick the wrong choice, really, because you shouldn't be the chooser at the end of the day. I don't know. That was my own kind of personal, one of my eye-opening things when I got more into accessibility. So all awesome things for all of us to continue thinking about. So great kickoff today. I'm going to go to Crystal. If you're ready to spin the wheel, and you can go ahead and say start when you're ready and then stop. And again, a motion warning if you just joined the stream. This graphic will have a spinning motion.
Right.
All right, we're spinning.
Stop.
All right. So I always put this on the wheel and I make sure we get to it even if we don't land on it. But the topic is, why do you do it? So why do you advocate, or why are you in the field of accessibility? Whatever this question means to you.
Yeah, this is kind of a multi kind of prong question for me. I do it, for kind of purely, I say selfish reasons, but of being someone who has multiple disabilities. And, when I first really got into learning about accessibility, really realizing that, it wasn't really approached in the way I found satisfactory that would, really, I know benefit me, but I realized a lot of other people in my shoes. So that is one of the, that kind of purely like, I want things to, like I want to do things. I want to, go to sites and be able to, partake in the newest technology, though I don't, a lot of times when there's new apps and stuff, I don't because whatever. But then also just during, being in a family with family members who also had disabilities. My grandmother, who was just who raised me, was she had diabetes and had both of her legs amputated, and she was someone who especially for being very older Black woman who lived during like the depression and things like that, and really saw her disabilities were one, she definitely didn't want people to make inspiration like oh, like look at you strong. She did what she had to do. Like she, after she had her first leg amputated, she still worked as a cleaner and a cook and things like that, and and she was very unabashed about, yes, I do have, an artificial leg and a prosthesis. And, when people would try to point that out, she was very, very, I'm not going to repeat a lot of it. I can't repeat any of the words she would say because she was very, very, she could swear with the best of them. And, and but she will tell people, she's like, well, you can say all you want, but I can still beat your butt, even with one leg. And and also having a sister with autism, and who's no longer here, but when I remember being in the room where she was, when she was diagnosed, and they were like, oh, well, she'll never be able to do anything on her own and things like that. And for me, and that, and that wasn't true. And she worked, it wasn't like, oh, look at her doing so much, that inspiration porn that gets out there. But, with my family, it's like, yeah, you have a disability. It doesn't mean, you're lesser, your people need to feel this, a particular way of like, you got to work with what you have and just and go about your life, and you're you, and that's it. And my sister, she ended up going to college, where had her own job, lived independently. And that's kind of my thing is just that I believe what I do, it's a human right, it's a civil right. And it's I don't I for me, I just fundamentally don't understand why people have to make it this. It's like accessibility is so hard. It's something that it's just like exhausting, because it's like anything else. This is just what you do. There's like in technology, there's certain things you have to do. Like you have to deploy to get things on prod. Well, you have to do accessibility. That is just how I see things. So that's
Yeah.
my rant.
No, that's thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. And uh, definitely that last point, wholeheartedly agree with, of course. um, yeah, Ashley, how about for yourself? Why do you do what you do related to accessibility and advocacy and things?
Yeah, so that's such a huge question. It's so big. So I've been listening to Crystal's perspective and thinking about that the whole time that she was speaking too. So I've been disabled my whole life. So I have a genetic hearing thing. Um, and so I've seen a lot of like, people just not like super blatant, like outright discrimination of like not letting me do things, but a lot of people just doubt me. Um, and, people making jokes and stuff like that, especially as a kid, because I had hearing aids in like third grade or something. So stuff like that. And I'm pretty rebellious. So part of it is, I like being able to just show people like, oh, I told you so. I'm not incapable of doing things. Like I can do things. I just have to do them differently sometimes, and I have to navigate the world a little differently, but I'm still able to accomplish my goals and things like that. On that same concept, like when it comes to web accessibility specifically, I like helping other people do that. Um, so I like being able to build things that take down barriers, or teaching people about the concepts in general, but also with tech specifically, of like how can we make sure that there aren't barriers here so people can do what they need to do. Um, but I've also learned, so with the pandemic and like coming home well over a year ago now, a year and a half ago, um, I I'm not officially diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure I have ADHD. Like I'm pretty sure it has made so much of my life make sense learning about that. And so with all the reading that I've done on it, I've learned about this is also a concept my therapist who I'm working with on it, who told me about this, that I'm a very like justice seeking person, and there's something called justice sensitivity with ADHD. I don't think it's really heavily researched, but I have like with some when something is unjust, it like really extra bothers me. So it's partially that, like making sure that things are just for everyone and fair. And I also have the perspective of like, I know what it feels like to be excluded or doubted or whatnot. So it comes down to treating people how I want to be treated. Um, and then the last part of it for me is like, I have the ability to do all of these things. So like with my background, I was privileged to go to a really great school in college and have a really great education that taught me so many things. And I've had good jobs where I've met great people who have taught me about various things. And I can use all of this, going forward to try to build better things for everyone. And I also was taught about advocating for myself a lot in college through the accessibility office. The person who runs the office, or I don't know if she still does, but she did at the time. She was fantastic about teaching me how to advocate for myself, and she was really great. So I take all of these things and apply it to all of this, and I just want to build things better. But it also comes down to the last thing that Crystal said, is like this is no different than any other thing that we have to learn, at least as developers. um, we learn algorithms and all this other stuff that is really hard. So like accessibility is one of those things too. It's just another concept. And that's what I really try to reinforce with people, is like it's no different than any other coding concept that we learn, and it takes time to learn, and it's okay. People have like this, they think they have to be perfect about it. And people sometimes feel like when they get criticized in general, but also with accessibility, that you're saying like you hate disabled people. And some people do outright say that, but that's not appropriate because that's not true, or it doesn't have to be true. That's not criticizing people uh constructively. If you say like you hate disabled people because you changed the font, on Twitter, like that's not very constructive at all. But it's just not a perfect thing. You don't have to be perfect at it, and like being transparent about that, and being open about your learning, like we do with everything else, like learning in public and tweeting about it and building sites and having public repositories and all these things that we do, like all of that is applicable to accessibility too. And I know that, and I want to help other people know that as well. So those are all the things that go into the
Yeah.
answer for that question. It's a huge question. There's probably more because it's so big.
Yeah. No, that was really awesome. Thanks again for sharing all that. I appreciate you both being so open with your experiences, and that helps us all. I think a lot of it is, I think I mentioned last stream, most of what I've learned about accessibility is kind of through osmosis, which is mostly because folks are um, open to sharing their experiences. And the more you're kind of exposed to, the more equipped, if you will, you are to recall that and bring it into your work and your consciousness and decisions you make moving forward. So I really appreciate that from both of you. Awesome. Those have been great topics. Let's go ahead and go to our next one, and we are back to Ashlee to spin the wheel. If you just joined the stream, this wheel graphic will have a spinning motion. So whenever you're ready to
This
say start.
is this is so much fun. I have
Oh,
never
great.
done anything like this, and I love it.
Awesome.
Start.
Okay, here we go.
Stop.
Ooh, we landed on spinner's choice, which means you can pick from the wheel, if you have that graphic
Oh
handy,
my. Okay.
or you can, if something else has come up
I
to
have the
mind.
stream.
Okay. Yeah,
Let's see.
definitely doesn't have to be on the wheel. So,
Well, I'm not going to be able to think of anything else, I promise. Oh my gosh, now it's sideways. We already answered that one. Oh, these are on here. Are these on here multiple times?
they are. Yes.
Some of them?
Yes. And
Okay.
there is a list below the graphic I sent. Sorry, I should have reordered that. That
No,
was
it's
silly of
okay.
me.
Okay, so I'm gonna go with one of the things that I suggested, whenever we set this up a while ago.
Yeah.
And that's keyboard navigation.
Awesome. Okay. Go for it.
So what do I want to talk about with this? The most recent thing that I can think of where I've, had conversations on this were like keyboard shortcuts, which is something that I definitely want to learn more about because all sites, so they have, what is that called? They have like a help modal that you can pop up. I have no idea how to pop it up on all sites. There's apparently like a keyboard shortcut that is common. But what that gets into is like all sites do it differently. And I forget what group it was in where we had this discussion, but someone was creating a game. And I can't remember what the game was either. I think it was like a Minesweeper, actually.
Okay.
I think. So what they were doing is they made it work with a mouse, but they also wanted it to work with keyboard navigation and also with phones. So there's so much that goes into that. And I think that's awesome that they were doing that. They were putting themselves up to that challenge. And that would be a great thing to talk about in an interview too, for anyone that is wondering, like if you're talking about a side project, like talk about the things you've practiced, like making a game work on all devices and with a keyboard. That's super, that would have such a good discussion. So what they were getting into is they didn't want to interfere with keyboard shortcuts, but they also wanted to add some shortcuts. So that's such an interesting topic. And like, I haven't done a ton of reading on that, but that's something that I definitely want to do because I don't know, like all assistive technologies, they have their own shortcuts and things like that. There's like, I can't even count. Like there are so many, and I don't know how anyone memorizes them. Like with the Chrome box, well, it used to be called Chrome box. It's like screen reader now in Chrome. The name has changed 100 times, I feel like, since I started using it. But the Chrome screen reader extension, that one has a ton and I can never remember it. And then when I have a Mac and when I try to use VoiceOver, like that one has a ton of different shortcuts that you use to turn it on and off and do all the different things. And that's just something that I want to read a lot more about. And I don't know what the standards are on it. Like, is there a standard keyboard shortcut to do like a super common thing? Like Command or Control S is to save something. Like that is pervasive, in everything. And I want to know if there's like a list of them somewhere.
Yeah, really good point. I that recently kind of cropped up for myself. Not in a personal project, but I remember that coming up. Yeah, I can't remember who was talking about it recently. Maybe it was about the same game, and it's just been a while since I saw it. But yeah, certainly for myself, keyboard navigation, I'm usually thinking web, and I'm thinking about visible focus, and because I'm not personally working on applications where we're concerned about keyboard navigation keys other than like escape key to get out of a modal or drop down and things like that, which of course is equally important. And to your point, one of those things that assistive technology users probably rely on to an extent, or expect at least, I should say, to be a capability, but it's really easy to skip if you use a hack or something. So, which I won't tangent into. Um, so yeah, Crystal, you're any thing to add for yourself on keyboard navigation, whatever kind of realm that brings for you?
Um, First one with keyword shortcuts, I am kind of when I'm first like learning like any sort of like new software or platform, and my husband, when my out like when I'm, he's always like, "Here's a shortcut," because he's always used it probably before, and we always that is always a fight in the beginning of like, and it always leads to me. I was like, I will figure this out because you're trying to make me use a shortcut right now. So that's like shortcuts are useful, and I usually end up as I go along and using things, I'll pick it up because I get frustrated. I'm like, this is taking too long. But me and shortcuts have a couple, especially when my husband is involved. But when it comes to keyboard navigation, this and I've talked about this quite a lot on like social media, but really keyboard navigation when it comes to testing, and that is something I have been really pushing, because especially with accessibility testing, there's kind of been a focus on screen readers, and and when I first really came, that's kind of how I came into accessibility because my background in quality engineering and QA is testing, and so that was the first thing that that's actually how I was really first introduced into web accessibility, was a ticket for testing something with the screen reader. And there's that focus, and I realized that that is probably not the first, that is really not the first thing people should do testing for accessibility on. One, assistive technology, many of the assistive technology software use keyboard inputs. So really, it's so much better to have people use to test using keyboard navigation, versus because one, everyone's familiar with the keyboard, for the most part. Two, it's very cost effective, so you don't have to have any sort of new kind of device or anything like that. And you can find many of the issues that you would find with a screen reader or say a switch, though they're not always one-to-one, doing keyboard testing. Because I find that if you really try to educate, like, oh, let me teach you how to use a screen reader, there is that something, as Ashley talked about, where that kind of hesitation of like, I don't know how to use a screen reader, and this is going to seem like I hate disabled people because I don't know how to use it. And especially, I feel that sometimes when I'm teaching someone about like a screen reader, and knowing that I am that I do use screen readers, they're like, oh no, if I use the screen reader badly around her, she's going to get upset. Which is like, I don't know why you're getting upset, because I don't know all the commands for the screen reader, that and I use this, like it's like I don't know everything for JAWS or NVDA. I know a lot for voiceover on desktop, and then and my main screen reader is TalkBack, but again, I don't have all that stuff memorized, and there's quite a few times where I'm on using voiceover, and when it comes to tables, I am so bad where I have to go and look at a cheat sheet of like, okay, how do I navigate through this table again? But so that's kind of my thing. It's just that if you are doing accessibility testing and you're trying to figure out, how do I approach this? Do I need a screen reader? Do I need all these devices? The first thing, like in the, it's the bare minimum, but it's such a strong and really robust thing to do, is keyboard navigation.
Yeah, that was amazing. I appreciated the dip into kind of considerations of other assistive technology, and that's a good kind of first step. And I especially appreciated the reminder that for folks that aren't accustomed to using assistive assistive technology, that first of all, it's not always screen readers, and second of all, that we might assume that the folks that do use them routinely are experts, and that isn't necessarily the case. They also have varying features between them. And I've seen arguments like, why isn't accessibility standard? I'm like, believe me, everybody wishes accessibility was standard. They wish these keyboard shortcuts were standard or whatever it is. So that was a really great reminder that we, for folks, again, not working in it every day, uh, whether that's using the tools or building with the tools in mind, that um, there are a lot of inconsistencies even in what we consider to be like foolproof guidelines for building for those. So awesome. I think we have time for one more topic before we kind of close out for today. So Crystal, we're back to you to spin the wheel. Whenever you're ready, a motion warning that this will spin for folks on the stream.
Start.
All right, we're spinning.
And stop.
Oh, we're back on user preferences, so we're gonna have to do a respin.
Okay.
So whenever you're ready.
Start.
All right, yep.
And stop.
Oh, you know what? I have my wheel to like slow down, and so it only went like 3 topics, and it landed back on why do you do it? So one more time.
Start.
Okay.
And stop.
All right. By a hair, I think a great one to end on, because this is a topic I associate with both of you doing amazing at, which is accessibility education. So I know you've both been speakers. You obviously do a lot of online resources. I'm going to link, Crystal, to your most recent video in the chat, which is amazing. And I know, Ashlee, you're working on a project on the side, so feel free to bring that up. I don't think it's public yet. You've just been talking about it, the HTML semantics one. But anyway, whatever this brings to mind for you, Crystal, you're up first on this one.
Yeah, like that's kind of my main thing is that I when it comes to education, I want to make sure this is something I tell people. I really want to educate myself out of a job in accessibility. I feel like, it's one of those things of, I want this to be, when you talk about technology, you're talking about accessibility, and so that's kind of why I do it. Like I also I'm really on this, kind of initiative to make sure I put like information and knowledge in as many forms as possible, because making sure that, because a lot of people learn different ways. I know I'm like that, depending on when it comes, like, how I learn about code, how I learn about maybe some more kind of dense, kind of material. It might be, it might be visual, it might be art, it might be written, it might, there's, all these different things. And also that in coming back to, people, that, disabled people, of, really making sure they have access to that information as well, because you can't just put, something in one particular form, because it may be inaccessible to others. And so that is why I put all this, it's like I have a day job, and it's pretty, it takes up a lot of time, but it's really important for me to get that information out there, especially with a lot of the boot camps and other, and when it comes to, like, even in, like, CS programs, and in, like, 4-year universities and things, and colleges like that, there's not a lot of education, especially when it comes to, like, semantic HTML and things like that. It's just really disappointing to me, and really making sure that that knowledge gets out there, because I know there's a lot of people out there who don't know that stuff, and it's not because they don't want to. It's just that that wasn't provided in their education. And so, like, actually, you were talking about that, where you mentioned, where there's a lot of people who, you know, they do care, and they want to, they do want to, they're learning how to do stuff, and it, I think sometimes, people are like, well, you did this wrong, and it's inaccessible, so that means you don't care about people with, disabilities. And for a good majority of the people I come, across who are beginning their accessibility like knowledge and education, that's not the case. It's just that they're like, I didn't have access to this stuff. I, did a boot camp, or I did a development certificate, and we only spent a small amount of time on cementing HTML and CSS, and then we went straight to maybe a framework, and so divs and spans are all we knew. We do. And so that's kind of my thing, is that it's important. I want to make sure it gets out there, and eventually when I retire, I can play video games, don't have to worry about them being accessible, so I can, spend my twilight years with my husband. I don't know, we don't play Halo or anything like that because I don't like it. But if I wanted to, if I'm 90 years old and I want to play Halo, whatever, it's like Infinite Sun, I can, because it is accessible to me. And that's because that the people who are coming up and making those those games and those websites and stuff know about accessibility.
Yeah. More excellent points. I love thinking of it future forward too, that whatever we do today helps our own future selves probably in some way or form. So awesome. Ashlee, how about your comments on accessibility education?
Yeah, so education is where it has to start. And Crystal was definitely getting into this because not a lot of educational programs really talk about it, accessibility, as much as they should. And I think I'm seeing a shift in that, at least in the last couple of years that I've been focusing on it. So it could be the Twitter algorithm, who knows? Because I follow a lot more people than I did in 2019 when I joined. Well, when I rejoined, I guess, because I did have Twitter a long time ago. Please don't read it. I can't delete the account because they won't let me in. It's a whole situation. But anyways, I see a lot more people talking about accessibility and wanting to learn about accessibility, and that's really great. But we do need to go more to the source, or, we need to, not that anyone's not pushing, but like that's where a lot of the work needs to be done, is that we need more of like a systemic change around it so that people are learning more about it from the beginning. So I went to college from 2013 to 2019. And at the beginning, I wasn't doing web dev stuff. Well, actually, I didn't do much web dev at all my entire time there, because programs like degree programs, they don't always focus on specific subsets of programming. They teach you, Java, C, whatever they teach, a bunch of stuff that's not specifically web development. But as far as I remember, I don't even think that the web dev courses, like the elective courses, discussed accessibility, as far as I remember. And I think that's different now, because I have spoken, well, a year or so ago, I spoke with someone that's still at the university I went to, and they do talk about it some now, which I think is really good. I don't know what the quality or, how high or low level they go into that at all. I have no idea, but hopefully it's great. So that's definitely where we have to go, at the same time as trying to educate people actively who are past that point, which I think is why it's really hard, because there's just so much ground to cover, and it's unfortunate, but I do know of, so I think Verizon is partnering with, I can't remember who they are. And I learned this from a talk that I watched a couple of months ago, that they're partnering with someone and they're working on educating people at an earlier stage about accessibility. And I think that's really great. And we need more, like large company backed initiatives about that, because that's the other way we need systemic change, is like the industry needs to push for this. So, we have companies like Twitter that formed a new accessibility team last year. And there are places like GitHub that have an accessibility team. And like these super large companies where people are very online, or they use them daily in their jobs, these are the ones that really need to push for accessibility, because people are really paying attention to them. And if they are considered industry leaders, they start leading in things like accessibility, then people are going to be like, okay, well, if GitHub's doing it, we need to do it too, right? So that's where we also need change. So that's another big ask, because companies, like, you can't just tell them to do something and then they'll do it. We've been shouting at all kinds of companies for years on Twitter. So um, it's all up to the people that are in leadership there. So hopefully we get good people in leadership that start these kind of initiatives. And then for myself, so Crystal said that we need more materials on semantic HTML. I'm actually working on two. So one of them is an egghead course, and I'm like actively working on that one. And the chat. So the first thing that I have here is a link to the GitHub repository, which is where there will be a README there about like what the course will be about specifically, and that'll be like the course example. So that's something that I'm actively working on, and hopefully in the next several weeks we get that out. And then another one is staysemantic.com, which is the next one I'm sharing. And that one is more of like a reference site. And what I found when I was working with screen readers and reading about like what people don't know as much about, and Crystal also addressed this in the last thing that we talked about, of like screen readers have a really high learning curve. And so that's partially why it's hard to start with that, and why things like keyboard navigation are easier to start with because of the learning curve. But even if someone does know how to use a screen reader, they don't always know how something is supposed to sound. It just says things and they're like, it said things, like maybe that's right. So what I hope that this site will be eventually is a bunch of demos of pretty basic stuff, and like ramping up into more complex examples of different types of components and whatnot. And what really sparked this for me was the conversation that happened a couple months ago on Twitter about TikTok's documentation of using a button instead of a link for something. And so that is one of the biggest debates, I feel like, in accessibility, of like, do I use a button? Do I use an anchor? And this isn't going to necessarily tell people like which thing to use. This is going to be like, listen to how these sound, and then you can decide for yourself which one sounds better, which one is actually going to convey what I need to convey. And that's the goal with this site. So there will be hopefully a whole bunch of demos on there, but the ones that I want to start with are buttons and anchors or links. And what are those called? Oh my goodness. Detail summary. That's what they are. They're like accordions is what they are. And then the other side of this will be like, if you make a small change, how does that change what it sounds like? And then kind of some do's and don'ts or caveats. I haven't worked out all the language with it, but that's the goal of this site. Hopefully that's more of a reference thing. And then the other one, the course, will be more instructional, kind of like a tutorial type deal. But I plan to cover a lot of concepts and high level disability experience kind of things in there too, that get into, I don't really like the word empathy, because if you're not disabled, you can't really like actually empathize. Like it's a tricky conversation and topic, but that's the goal with that one, getting a little bit more into the why, but definitely heavy focus on semantics for all of them, and using what you have out of the box, because that's cheaper, obviously, and that gets people more inclined into getting with accessibility, unfortunately. But
Yeah. Awesome. I showed both of those on screen as well. Thanks for adding those links to the chat. We're in the last couple of minutes here, and I already mentioned earlier, but this is the last in our accessibility August run of streams. I posted the link to our YouTube in the chat if you want to catch up on our previous ones, which have been equally excellent. We covered each stream ended up being a nice kind of subset of topics. So we didn't have a lot of crossover, which was pretty awesome. So if you go and watch the whole run, you're going to learn a lot about a lot of different aspects of accessibility. My 15-second tag on to our last topic, though, there is, I I anybody can start doing accessibility education, right? And it's not just something that I think there's a misconception that somebody else will do it, and I mean that both by they'll provide education or they'll actually be somebody that does it in your team, and that's so probably inaccurate for the majority of places unless you are part of a super huge company. And even then, it still comes down to individuals to make sure that you have, you know, you're doing your part. We all have to do our part to make this work for everyone. And so, thank you so much, Ashlee and Crystal. You have a couple minutes if you would like to plug anything else. I know Ashlee, we got a couple things in there. Crystal, I'm going to pull up the at least one thing that I know of that you're doing coming up real quick, which is kicking off Inclusive Design 24. But is anything else that either one of you would like to share before we close today?
Yeah, that would, the design 24, and my talk is focused on how to talk about it, accessibility to people who are not in the accessibility kind of area and not in technology, because I feel that's really important. Kind of tagging on into the accessibility education. One thing I want to say is also it's really important to really talk to accessibility like with little kids, because they are also starting to learn coding like in very young things, like and so that's really important. I know Roblox is actually had added a section because the kids, it's like, hello fellow kids. I've been trying to talk to kids about accessibility, and I just feel like I have no clue. But that's but that really getting this started, like it's like if you can use a computer, you need to know about accessibility.
Mhm.
But also with that is that Inclusive Design 24. Also, I will be putting out a kind of get started guide with using about how to do some mobile accessibility testing using Android Studio and Xcode for a lot of people who want to kind of get started with mobile accessibility, but don't have devices, because those are expensive.
Yeah. Awesome. Those sound fantastic. Ashlee, anything else you would like to promote real quick? I'm going to throw both of your kind of primary sites here in the chat as well.
I don't have anything to promote other than what I already did, but I
Perfect.
love the title of that talk.
Yes, it's super great. Much
That is
appreciated.
fantastic. And also, thanks for having me. I have loved this so
Awesome.
much, and
Yeah.
it was really hard keeping a secret. I have a hard time with secrets.
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, oh, I was about to do it, and I was like, oh no, that's right, it's supposed to be secret. So I did, because I almost left the cat out of the bag like 2 weeks ago.
Yes, it is a little bit of a fault in the plan. So, but anyway, I think we had pretty good participation today, and I put in the links to YouTube. So definitely, we can share that around as a more permanent resource. Thank you again for joining, and stay tuned. I'll be working out what topic we're gonna do next with Dev Roulette and getting my next set of speakers invited. We will see you sometime in the future for that.